Okay, so I think we'll kick off. Thank you all for joining. We're here to walk you through today an end-to-end example of our stack, our DoubleClick stack, featuring a example of our feature demo, HappyBird. Some of you guys might have seen this on Think with Google. If you haven't, we'll share the link a little bit later, and you can see our case study of an example where we've kind of gone through and run through a whole demo from end to end. So let's kick off. Today you're joined by two of our technical creative specialists. My name is Amar.
Antoine.
And we're the DoubleClick creative tech specialists. We have a long-running history of running with our DoubleClick stack, working with our stack and our partners in the UK, helping them to grow. And our expertise, like I've mentioned, is more in the technical and creative side. But this is a great example where we've managed to kind of put all these things into one place. And hopefully we can walk you through a few of these, the end-to-end demo and highlight some of the areas that I think are going to be key, especially in the next year. Cool. Just another note for the guys who've just joined. Just to say again, please add your questions in the live YouTube chat. We can see it's working on site, so thank you guys. But please add in your questions as and when they come up. And when you think of them, we'll cover them towards the end. If you can't access it, please refresh the browser window just to reload it. Cool. So we're looking to take you through some of the introduction to some of the tools that we have and that we've used throughout the end-to-end demo. This will also consider Google Web Designer as our primary creative design development tool here. We'll be building out the feed and showing you how we built out the feed and the decisions that we made and how it's structured, so you'll get to see how dynamic works in practice. We'll also cover the studio part, so the housing for our creative assets. And then we'll touch upon the bid manager and the kind of signal-based aspects, including also looking at how DCM plays a role in that, DoubleClick Campaign Manager. And then we'll take you through some of the kind of things around reporting just to make sure that everyone's familiar and we can kind of go through this process knowing that, it's great to have something up and running, but making sure that we're able to get something back from it and report on it, because often that's very important to learn about our campaign. And also we're going to run through a few Q&A as well, just to finish things off. So looking at campaign performance, we know that this is something that we often talked about as Google, but our Media Lab, Google Media Lab, conducted some research, and they found that 70% of the campaign performance is down to creative. So what this tells us is obviously creative is really, really important, but it's not just enough to maybe know about creative or be running creative in a siloed environment. It's about how does that connect in with the rest of the activity, the rest of the teams that surround creative and data-driven creative campaigns. And also it's worth asking yourself, kind of, do you think that you're leveraging it to the best ability that you can right now? Do you think that this is something that you can leverage a little bit more of? And if it's so important, how can we really maximize this part of the campaign? And obviously for a lot of you guys on the live stream, many of you will be traders, many of you will be campaign planners. Programmatic is often your bread and butter, but how does creative really fit in with that picture? How does it work? And we talk about real time and creating this at scale. Is this something that is easy to do? And we're hopefully here to show you a little bit how that works. But also, even if you're not the one implementing some of these things, having an understanding of the full picture is really, really important. And I think that's something we can definitely go through today in a bit more detail. So I'm just going to introduce to you the HappyBird example that we've created. This is an end-to-end example showing a kind of very visual way of how we can kind of conceptualize data-driven creative. I'll walk you through the demo right now. We'll send this link around for you guys to play around with yourselves, but it's good for you guys to know this is how it would work. And so when you open up, we created a tool that would help us show the ability of data-driven creative, show how signals relate to the creative itself. And so in the interface, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a tool panel, and these are going to be representative of our signals. So these are data inputs that our creative is going to know about. And so the creative is going to be able to use those in its execution to deliver a personalized experience. We talked about personalized experience just before this. This is going to be a really easy way to show this. It's not necessarily the be-all and end-all of how we can show personalization, but this gives you a really great idea of how we can start to meld some of the signals. And these are signals that exist in DoubleClick Bid Manager or your Bid Manager too often, and how this can relate to the creative. So we'll go through and we'll just select some of these signals. And this is a simulation of what would occur, but it will show you how the creative reacts. So we're just going to choose an option here. We're going to choose male just as a gender. We can choose their age. So what age are we targeting? We're looking at, let's say 20. We'll leave it at 25 to 50. And then we're going to look at what interests do people have. You know, what best describes their lifestyle. What signals do we want to reference? And we'll pick the gamer one, just for the purposes of this example. And then we've got one last signal that we've added in, which is a music preference. So we'll pick hip hop, and we'll give it a launch and see what it does. And you'll see on the right hand side the preview changes from what it was before to a different style of creative. We can see that the creative stylistically has changed. Some of the images and the copy will change. And if you expand it out, we can expand it out to show you what that looks like. And what we've done is created a working game that reacts to signals in real time. And so as you can see, the flying man running through these pipes, jumping, being careful not to hit the pipes. And if we kind of go back, you can see how the actual signals are shown up here as well. We chose some of these things. We chose a hip hop track, which you'll have maybe noticed in the background, the stylistic changes that occur with a gamer interest. So we're making sure that the message that we intend to give out there is fully tailored to what the user wants. And I think this is really important to note that there's obviously many variations, as you might be able to tell as we go through some of the examples. Maybe we can just change it to maybe a female character for this one, and maybe we can choose a slightly older character, 50 and over, for older audiences out there. And then we're going to choose, say a sort of fashion-forward interest. And then maybe we'll change it up. We'll go back to a poppy music preference. So if we launch that, you'll see that the game quite drastically changes its appearance for a start, but also you can see subtle changes in the creative. You can see the actual character changes to maybe match, and also we've got the signals there, so you can see them, and you can see the kind of the stylistic changes. So we're able to parcel that data down. We're able to communicate that across, and the user essentially gets a personalized gaming experience. Which we encourage you guys to play at home. Play around. We'll send a link out, but you can try and see if you can beat our high scores. We've got a few competitions internally. We've got about people who can regularly hit on 20. So we'll be interesting to see. Please comment if you beat our score. We'll be very disappointed, but also quite proud of you. So just going forward. With this kind of end-to-end example, there's a lot of factors that go into making something like this. It's not just the creative. It's often a combination of other things. So we've got the creative, which is often just the assets, and when we look at the more design elements that come up, data plays a massive part, as we saw in some of the signals. And this is where you'll have to often rely on what insights that you currently have, but you may also need to create some additional insights to know where you're going to target this specific creative to which specific audience, and also the actual tech side of things. So the way I look at this is our stack brings a lot of these elements together, whether it's the physical buying of inventory, of where this is going to serve out to, how this gets delivered from creative in studio to the rest of the stack, and also how we kind of report back on some of the data to make sure that we understand whether something is performing well, or perhaps needs additional tweaking. And obviously this encompasses a whole host of products, which we'll kind of walk through today. We've got an end-to-end flow, and we can show you how HappyBird was made through our stack. Creative assets is the first step in the process: designing, developing the assets, making sure that you have all the variations that you might need. This is often the more technical part of what we talk about, but also this is a pivotal point where often is done in silo, but with the rest of the stack, you can really gain an idea of what maybe your creative assets might need to look like, depending on, say, for example, the audiences that you're going to target next. The audience data that you have can be owned by yourself. It can be used as Google third-party data, but that data is your kind of weaponry to where you're going to be able to target your creative towards. And it's really important to connect all of the pieces together. If you've got data siloed in various areas, it's a chance to put it into the stack, and also once it's in one place, work out what your structure looks like for it to be able to run across different platforms. And then you've got dynamic tools. This is traditionally lives in Studio. Dynamic being the feature that we have to allow messaging to change depending on specific set of logic that you create. And this is often used in rich media banners to actually switch between versions of the creative, which is something that we've done here for a base creative that you build, and then subtly tweaking animation that changes depending on the audience data that we specified in step number 2. You've then got the ad serving side of things. This is where you're starting to plug up and connect up all the pieces. You've got creative, plugging into Campaign Manager. We're setting up our placements and our strategy as well, and our structure to where things want to serve out. There is a bit of logic that you can set up there too. We won't go into too much detail about that today, but we will mention that there are things that you can definitely do, and features that were really helpful in actually creating a full end-to-end experience that are really useful to know when you're building creative. And on top of that, we've got the programmatic side of making sure that it's delivered out to the exact right user at the right time, and the measurement piece as well for some of the performance-based analytics that we're able to gain, but also the reporting that we were able to preemptively build in, so we know what kind of output that we're expecting, what kind of insights that we're hoping to get from this. Here we've got a brief overview of the account structures, and this is a really good way of conceptualizing where our stack comes into play. And often these are things that you'll be very familiar with, but knowing how these pieces connect up, knowing that advertisers from DBM to DCM to Studio connects up together is a really important mechanic, so you can know how to structure your campaigns well, but also know that your creative in DoubleClick Studio has kind of 2 elements. It's got the physical asset side, but it's also got the profile side, the dynamic profile. This is where we would live with, our rules would live, for you guys who are familiar, or on the logic that allows it to know which creative or which data points to pick in a specific situation. But this is a good overview just for you guys to come aware, especially if you're only siloed and familiar with one side of the platform. It's helpful to understand that there are connection points that are made that are one-to-one relationship. For example, a creative is pretty much synonymous with a placement in DoubleClick Campaign Manager, and knowing that there's a strong one-to-one relationship between those two is really important in how we structure our campaign setup in running a strategy such as HappyBird. So just a brief overview of how dynamic works. This is a combination of where you're running through the stack, and dynamic we talked about is how we use a feature in Studio to let the messaging change and react to certain signals that come in from the creative. And this data can be DCM data, it can be the floodlight data, it can be the data from DBM, it can be data from multiple sources. For the information flow, you're looking at creating a specific feed. Now these feeds I would look at it as your data source, where your data lives. There's typically no logic at this point. It's just about structuring your data in a way that the stack can use it, the way that the tools like DoubleClick Studio knows how to deal with the various values. And often this will be in a specific column and row layout that we'll kind of go through in a little bit more detail. As you build the feed, you'll upload it to DoubleClick Studio. DoubleClick Studio houses all of your physical assets, and that's including your creative as well. So this is where we're combining the data and the kind of design together in one section. And this is where it's really powerful to have it all in one place, because at that point, once it's all in one place, you can now push it to DoubleClick Campaign Manager. And DoubleClick Campaign Manager will be able to create the specific setup for you to run it against whatever your strategy your strategy looks at. And when you've got the creation of a physical tag that's been trafficked, so that creative asset has kind of been pushed and now is accessible through a tag that is loaded up on a publisher page, that's where we can kind of see, you're starting to see the kind of dotted lines that we've got on here. And these are all forms of kind of data pass. This is kind of information exchange between one platform to one system to another. And DoubleClick Bid Manager obviously plays a big part in that to make sure that the tag goes to the right places. But DFP, DoubleClick for Publishers, also is important to note, because we do have mechanics that allow you to move data between, say, the tag and the publisher page. So it's important to know that these things exist. We won't necessarily go through a lot of these in massive detail, but knowing that that's the information flow, and knowing that there is ability to pass information across those platforms itself makes it really handy, because you know that there is accessible information that you can use in the creative to make sure that you're informing your decision as best as possible. It's not always going to be feed dependent or dynamic driven. It's not always going to be a set of rules that will make the decision. Sometimes the creative itself can make decisions based on the environment that it's in. So it's really important to know all those things and how that kind of works as a top level example, because when we talk about dynamic, I'm talking about this entire ecosystem of data passing to create personalization for creative.
Thanks, Amar. So with that, we are now going to really deep dive into all the steps that Amar just presented, and we're going to see how we really created this game, how we plugged in all the assets in, and we will start with the design, the development of the creative itself, really, which we have done in Google Web Designer. So Google Web Designer is a free authoring tool that Google proposes, which allows you, with a minimum amount of coding or even no coding at all, if you're doing something like a simple banner, to create these assets and serve them to your users. So it's important to note that Google Web Designer is not the only way to produce the creatives. You can also choose to hand code them yourself, or even use other tools like Adobe. But we recommend using Google Web Designer. So when you open Google Web Designer, you can see that there's a template gallery available. So that's great, because you can already choose a certain type of creative that you want to implement, such as expanding, push down, or multi-video, and so on. And really all the mechanism is already in place. You don't need to code it at all. And it already also contains all the events that you can track in your reporting later on. So when you get started, you will have this kind of view. It's a user interface which is quite similar to Adobe Flash, for those who have used it before. So you get a central stage, and on the left side you have some tools you can use to drag some elements in there and create all your visuals in here. And that's also where you drag certain components, which again contain already your interaction metrics. And that's great, because if you develop this manually or through other tools, you have to manually add all these interactions, which can be a bit difficult sometimes. So additionally to the stage, an important element of Google Web Designer is the timeline that we can see here at the bottom, just under the visuals. And this is where you can put all the components, all the different layers of your creative. And you can do like some pretty advanced things, like setting animations in here and events. So this is good to even create some sort of semi-advanced creative without any code. You also have the possibility to add your own code into here if you want to do some more advanced things. Like, for example, for this game, we have used the manual coding. Another great thing about Google Web Designer is that there is a direct connection to DoubleClick Studio, and therefore to the rest of the stack as well. So there is this part of the UI where you can link to your own account, and this will allow you to push your assets directly into Studio without having to manually upload them. That's one benefit. And as you can see, there's some pretty good options here where you can inline your JS and CSS files, so to compress and reduce the weight of the creative. You can add polite loading, which is also interesting. And another thing you can do, which we're not going to show in this demonstration, but you can have access to your dynamic setup in here and select the elements that you want to be controlled by your dynamic feed, and visually here assign it to them. So if you want to change the text of a header in your banner, for example, you can, through the UI, do that and connect it to your dynamic feed directly. And finally, it's really easy to use. So here you can see a really quick example of creating a video banner, and this was done in less than an hour. So if you are a media agency and you don't have a creative resource for a specific campaign, you can try and do it yourself in Google Web Designer. So once you have your assets created in Google Web Designer, or you have coded it yourself in HTML manually, you need to upload them into Studio. DoubleClick Studio is the sort of hosting platform that we have, where you put all your assets, and also you create your feed later on, but we'll come back to that. So Studio is a part of the DoubleClick stack. You can see it appearing on the top menu. It's under the Studio label in the dropdown. It's all free of charge if you are using DCM or DBM. So you will have an account once you get into Studio, and because this is more targeted at, let's say, creative agencies probably have projects going on with several advertisers. So the first thing you need to do is to create an advertiser for the campaign you're going to launch. So in this case, we created the HappyBird advertiser, and we created under that a campaign called the HappyBird campaign. Now, once the campaign has been created, through Google Web Designer, this becomes available. So we directly automatically uploaded the assets that we just created in there into Studio here. And as you see, this is the UI. It's under Manage Files section of the creative. And here you can see like the HTML files and sound files and PNG files that we have used to build the creative. They are all hosted in this part. Now, another great feature of Studio is called the asset library. So as you saw in our demo, as we changed the signals, the creative visuals adapted, and obviously we have a lot of different visuals that are in use. You don't want to upload all these visuals with your creative. It would make it too heavy. So this is where you can leverage the asset library, which is separate from your creative assets, but all of these assets can be used in your creative later on, can be called from the creative. Another great feature is that you can reuse these assets across several campaigns for an advertiser. So this is good if you have a lot of repetition of assets, like a logo that you use for a brand, or like specific CSS styles that are consistent. You can upload all of these files here, cross-reference them. Then if you want to edit these assets, you can do it directly into the asset library, and that will update all your creative across live. Once you have uploaded all your assets and added your events, we're not going to go into the events details here. You have an opportunity here to preview your creative. So as you see, there's this UI where we are previewing the game, the HappyBird game. So that's an important step, because you need to make sure your creative works pretty well before you submit it to QA. Now, we're not going to submit it to QA yet. We still have to add our dynamic feed and so on, but this is an important step. So we've just seen how to author the creatives in Google Web Designer, how to set them up and upload them in DoubleClick Studio, how to leverage the asset library for the dynamic elements, and finally preview the initial creative. Let's get on to the next phase.
Cool. So we're looking at audience data, and traditionally this has been used just for targeting specifically. So the audience data would be used in a very sort of traditional way to inform where and who it should serve to. We don't necessarily use it enough for creative itself. And in this instance, we're using audience data for creative decision. And that's a really important step to know. There's a bit of a shift that you don't have to choose and You don't have to choose either or, you can choose and you can choose to do this to inform what your creative looks like. Our data platform, Google has a lot of users logged in. We have a lot of information that we're able to aggregate and assess, and so this data is often useful, but it's often great when it's combined with your own CRM data, your own first-party information. And now's the best time more than ever to make sure that you're collecting it and your client is collecting it in a way that's useful for you to plug into the stack later on, because that stuff is going to be really, really important and will have profound impact and information on how your campaign will ultimately perform. For our example, we've created multiple creative iterations based on these signals that come in. And there's actually 405 different scenarios based on the signals we've chosen. We've chosen to actually be able to change the character based on a specific demographic, and that's in looking at, say, your gender and your age to make it look like the creative, the icon, the player icon would match the actual audience is intended for. We've even got a robot character as well, catch all. We've also got an interest-based signal that looks at how we change maybe the background imagery. Now, this is not just the background, there's a few other assets that will have changed in the middle, but your interest could give you an idea of the kind of vibe or the style. And this is more traditional creative, but this is quite an easy win for people who might respond to a different color scheme, people who are a bit more drawn to various things. You saw the gamer example, lots of the pixelated images in the background. That attracts those types of users, so this is something that you can play with. And then also the music side of things, I think this is a really interesting one where audio isn't necessarily forefront in stage when we're looking at display creative sometimes, but it is a powerful thing that you can kind of leverage. And if you know that those users are specifically interested, why not use it? Creative is completely tailored to the signals. So this is just to look at how those variations and the combination of those specific signals can give you a unique output. And in here, we've got our characters and our game specifically that completely change. So this is all personalization based on signals. To do this, you're going to need a feed. Now, there's a lot of information here around what specific feed formats you can use. 90% of the time, it's pretty much going to be a Google feed that we recommend, a Google Sheets feed. And what that really is that this is the data source that we prefer, or the format we prefer, just because it gives you a whole host of benefits, all listed out on the slide here. And ultimately, the feed is a really important step because it's the point where you put all your data into a structure that the system can understand. Now, this can be also XML for if you've got price feeds often, or hotel inventory, products, stocks. CSV, which is something that is a format that we can also ingest too. But we've also got Google Merchant Center, and this is primarily we use this for product remarketing. It's a very structured form of a specific type of feed. It's often, if you've used it on the AdWords side, we can use it for display as well. And this is to show that you can use a variety of formats. It doesn't necessarily need to be in one single form. But what we do recommend is Google Sheets. When we're structuring the feed, it's important to look at how we create it. And there's a few elements that are really important to look at. A feed obviously is just a bunch of data and is organized in a specific way. So your rows and your columns. We've colored this really helpfully. So on the left-hand side, you've got a unique ID, and that should be unique so that the system knows that one is different from another. It's a mandatory field that you have to include into the creative. We've then also got the physical inputs for your signals. So these are a demonstration of what signals do you really want to use as an input, and then also when you get those combination of inputs, what do you want to do with it? That represents a single row or a single iteration. You've also got the creative assets. So once you've actually made a decision on the specific combination and it finds the correct row combination, what assets should it serve out? What image should it give you? What will a creative need to know about at that point? And these can come from asset library as well, so we can host those creative assets too in our product. And then you also have a default column. This is a column that is used to flag to the system what happens when you can't necessarily match a specific combination. And this should always have a a true default somewhere there, because it will find that row and make sure that one serves if all else fails. So it's really important to include these things in the core structure of your creative. And as you can see, this is the building blocks of how we've started to build up some of these combinations in a kind of feed structured layout. Each line, it's really important to know, can be completely reported on. And in order to do that, what we recommend is to create a specific field that represents what that line is doing. So for example, you've got the first one which says M, U25, hip hop, pink clouds, and that represents your specific targeting signals. So it's important to know that when you get that back in your reporting in DCM, that you'll be able to actually decipher where it came from, and more importantly, also understand how to kind of look back and work out, why was that creative performing better than others? Because it's really important to know what the breakdown of that was, so that you can feed that back in as insights into perhaps your next campaign, and also report back on what's best performing to your clients. Again, it's really important to have the defaults in there. I can't stress enough. But the reporting label column here is the one that we just added in to the previous example here. So this is building up step by step the next stages of what we need to do for getting the feed ready to roll. And now, once we've got all of that in one place, you've got the reporting side, you've got the mandatory fields we talked about, the ID and the default field, you've got your targeting criteria, and then you've got in yellow, the actual physical assets you're serving. We now need to look at a specific filter. Now, this is not necessarily a filter, a set of logic, because this is essentially just a data source. But when we do add the logic, we have the ability to get the system to look at a specific column and make a decision on which creative variation to choose, in addition to the signals that we've previously used. Now, this one is a one that is really important for the audience side of who sees what. We're going to add in a DBM ID, and this is a filter that will actually dictate what to show next for a creative, and that will often be a specific line item ID. You can use other types of IDs in the system as well, such as placements and audience IDs as well. And this helps Studio understand exactly which row to pick and which audience to serve this out to. So this is where we're starting to connect the DoubleClick Bid Manager platform with our Studio platform as well, and essentially which audiences to target. But this filter is just, for this example, we've chose DBM ID. This can be geo, so a specific region or location, time of day, etc., etc. This can be a multitude of things. And so in this specific instance, we've actually defined a set of audiences for each one of these signals. So just to summarize, make sure that you understand which audiences that you're going to be addressing here in an example like this. It's really good and important to know what you have available and what signals and insights you already have. Building out the feed and doing this as a collaborative exercise, I think, is really important. It shouldn't be done in silo. It should be shared across the board, and everyone have visibility on the physical build of it, because essentially it's telling you what your creative is going to look like before it's even built at this point. Because it has the raw data that we're going to use in the feed, in the creative. And also it helps you define each individual scenario. We've also got the creative iterations, which we now know how to trigger based on physical filters or signals that we're passing in, and making sure that you remember that all-important reporting label to make sure we get reporting back.
Great stuff. So now we have our creative and our feed in place. We are going to come back to Studio and connect these two together through the dynamic profile option. So once you're in Studio, at the top, you will have a dynamic content section. And from here, you need to create a dynamic profile. You need to upload your source, your feed source. So here you can see in the UI, you have the choice between the different data structures we mentioned earlier. So in that case, we are going for the Google Docs we've just created. So we've uploaded now our Google Doc, and you arrive to a part of the UI where you have to tell Studio what each column is, essentially. So here we are defining the file types for each of the columns. So Studio picks it up on its own most of the time, but some of them you have to change manually. Now, the important one here is that because we are going to filter on DBM ID, we need to adjust this specific thing. So here we've chosen a custom value for DBM ID, and we've ticked the filterable box. The DBM line item ID is a bit of a specific one. That's why we are using custom value, because it's using a data path strategy. We'll come back to that. So once you've done that, you've mapped your field types to your data field. The next step is you will see this piece of JavaScript code coming up. So if you look at it, it's basically a JavaScript object that contains all the data, so all the columns data, but it's just like one row. So when your creative is being served to the right user through the decisioning process, you will get the right information in that JavaScript object. Now that's the JavaScript object you will use in your creative to modify the aspects of it. If you use Google Web Designer, you don't have to redo anything. It connects to it automatically through the UI, but if it's a hand-coded creative, you will have to copy and paste this code into your creative to make it work. There is also a part of the process where you need to define what optimization you want to choose. So that's like a rotation. That's for the case of A/B testing, when several rows are eligible to be served. So you can optimize it to the best click-through rate, for instance. And there is a machine learning algorithm that analyzes over time which rows perform the best and starts serving them more often than the others. Otherwise, you can also choose random and do your own analysis. Sorry. So random means that all the rows will be served equally. Once you have set up all your feeds, you are ready to QA. So this is where you publish your feed. But in fact, we are going to wait for this stage because we want to add the DBM line item ID into the feed. We will see how to set this up in the next steps. So we've seen how to upload the feed into Studio and map it, how to create the rules of the dynamization. We've touched onto how the optimization algorithm works and how to get to the QA process. Now that we have the creative and the dynamic feed linked together, the next step is to create the setup in DCM to be ready to traffic them.
So looking at the ad serving side, this is where the part in the process where we can now host and ad serve the creative. DoubleClick Campaign Manager is a tool that we use. This is to do with trafficking, attribution, reporting, as it says here. The important thing to note is once your creative is actually built and produced, it's going to be able to push to the DCM platform. And this is where we can do make our assignments from a creative to a specific tag that we can kind of send out to the rest of the world. So just a reminder of accessing DCM. It's part of our DoubleClick stack of products. And to get there, this is part of the trafficking side. So naturally, you pick the trafficking option to access the platform. Now, we're going to show you a brief overview of the platform and how we went through setting this up, just so you guys have a good idea of how this is possible and what goes into that creation. So as we go through, we actually need to assign that specific creative to a campaign. And the way we do that is in our kind of advertising view, we look at the creatives that have been pushed. Usually once you push them from Studio, there'll be a notification to say there is a creative, a new creative that needs updating, or the creative is in the platform. You should be able to see that. There'll be a rich media display expanding creative. That's the type that it will be listed out as. And you can kind of select that and start to form what is the assignments section, where we can actually assign that specific creative to a placement that we serve out. Going on just to the next point, where we actually structure this out, the traditional structure looks at a placement and an ad at a creative level. And our objective is to get a creative assigned to an ad slot, and the ad slot is connected to a specific placement. And you can have multiple ad slots under that placement that you create. In our instance, what we've done is we've created our core creative, our kind of hero HappyBird dynamic creative. We've assigned that to a specific placement, and that's going to be where most of our we'd like most of our advertising to go through. We also need to remember to create a default ad slot as well, so that if there's any problems with the actual specific ad serving, if they can't resolve, let's say the creative logic fails for some specific reason, the backup should show in DCM. And there's multiple layers of backups as well. Just to note, I won't go into them here, but you can find out a little bit more around on our help center. But essentially, it's really important that you have that there as well, because the reporting can tell you a lot of times where there isn't something that's maybe set up correctly, there's a link that's missing. So it's really important to have this structure in place up. And to actually create that creative, all you do is you click the new button, add from advertiser, and it's directly pushed in. So you can start assigning these as needed. Once you've made your assignments, so at this point in time, we have our structure, we have our tags pretty much almost ready to go. You can preview it. And the previewing we've updated in previous years to allow you to go in and actually preview with some of the parameters that it would be in a live environment. So you can simulate a lot of the features that we've actually added into this game. You can actually pull up the dynamic preview window directly from where we saw the creative on the last page. And we can actually add in where it says custom value, a specific DBM ID that we set up in our filter column, our DBM ID filter column in our feed. And what that does is say to the system, we would like to pass this ID in as if that was a specific user that we had targeted. So you can see live what it would look like had that user been targeted. This is a real powerful mechanic, because you can test through variations very, very quickly to understand if there's a specific set of values that you want to maybe test against. Do they all work correctly? Do the creative shop as and when you need it to? If there's something wrong with the creative, then you can communicate that back and show that really quickly. But alternatively, you can also test new variations very quickly by adding in new IDs, because essentially it's just another row in the feed that it can filter against. So that's good for understanding how updates are made, but also how we can actually preview whether something is working correctly. And if it isn't, you'll be sure that it will complain, and you can follow up on next steps, perhaps with our tech team or your own internal teams too. And so what we've generated a tag out, ready to go, and the placements are ready to be pushed into our next part of the platform, which is DBM. The tag that you'll see here is one of our ins tags. That's one of the newer forms of the tags that we have at DoubleClick. And in terms of actually using that tag and trying to test what it would look like in a live environment, so if you finish testing in our platform, you can test in the kind of normal web browser environment or a test page. We do have a tool called Easy Tag, where you can actually paste the tag into the tool, and it will pull up what the tag looks like as if it was serving in a specific placement. So this is a really useful tool. It's easy-tag.appspot.com. We'll send the deck around later so that you have the link, but it's good to actually practice in a live environment. That's kind of your next stage to make sure that your next checklist, it's all working in a platform, but make sure that it actually works in a live environment. And there's no other factors that maybe you haven't considered at this point. And the good thing about it is you can also add in the parameters at this stage, some additional parameters that you might want to make decisions from. And the creators should react, because at this point we've connected all the platforms together, from DBM to DCM to Studio to the feed, where we can see the logic working end to end. So this is a really important step. So just to summarize, we set up our campaign in our trafficking platform, DCM, DoubleClick Campaign Manager. These placements that we set up, the placement ad slot creative, are trafficked through to a specific tag. These tags can now be placed on pages. The ad shell and the creative shell is assigned to these placements, so it's kind of moving this across to where it needs to go. And the placements can be downloaded or pushed straight through to DBM. It's really important to know the benefits of the stack is to make sure that it gets pushed across without you having to do any additional steps.
Okay, and finally, to bring this all together, the last thing to do is to buy the audience in DBM and connect it back to our creative to complete the decisioning process. So DoubleClick Manager is the technology that enables you to buy the ad space on the internet and target the right audiences to deliver them the right message at the right time. so programmatic buying essentially. So coming back to one of the examples we presented earlier on, so we will go with this person that we will call Katie, who's a female, 30s. She's into beauty as an interest, and she likes pop music. So how are we going to buy this audience in DoubleClick Bid Manager? So first of all, we access the Bid Manager UI through the top menu stack as usual. And what you need to do here is to first create a campaign for HappyBird, which we are not showing here, and create an insertion order, which will feed in all the different audiences we want to target in this campaign. And then for each of the audiences, you need to create an individual line item. So this is what it looks like in the UI. So you can add a lot of different parameters here to refine your targeting. What we want to look at in this specific case is the bottom part of the screen here, where we've added some Google audience lists preferences in fashion, so the affinity categories fashionistas, and also pop music fans. In terms of demographics here, we've selected female and the right age category for Katie. Now, once you've done this targeting here, you get as part of the UI your line item with potential reach, which is being displayed at the top of the screen. In that case, that doesn't really match what we've just done, but it should do. And this is where you also assign your creative to the line item. So in that case here, you can see we have the HappyBird creative shell at the bottom with the DCM placement ID that contains our creative. And this is how the line item is connected to the creative through DCM, basically. Now, once you've created all your audiences, you have a view where you can see all your line items. In that case, we only have Katie. And there is an ID here on the right side. So this is the line item ID. This is what you need to make a note of and finally enter back into your dynamic feed in your Google spreadsheet. So that's the next step. And here, as you can see, we've added this exact DBM line item ID against the line that serves this specific scenario we want to show in the creative. So the pink clouds, the pop music, and the young character. Once you have done that, you have completed your whole dynamic feed. It's worth going back to your dynamic profile in Studio and having a last test by entering the real line item IDs. So in that case here, we've entered this KT ID, and when you launch the preview, you get to see the right visuals associated to that line item. And through here, that's called a tear sheet, and you can generate different scenarios in one tear sheet, which you can then send to your clients for validation. So that was the DBM side with both the audience, assigned the audiences to the creative, added the line item as this feed. We transformed the feed in Studio. Actually, we haven't shown that, but that's what you should do once you've added all the line item in it. And now you're ready to go live.
So once you've gone live and we've got things up and running, it's really important to understand that we've got two very important products in our stack that help us really get to grips with what the actual campaign or creative is doing in terms of performance. To do this, traditionally, from a DCM perspective, we go into the report builder in the stack. That's under reporting and attribution, and you can get access to this report builder feature. And this report builder allows you to look at specific templates of reports that you can create. For our instance, the useful one in this case to look at how well our creative is doing in our feed that we've just built in the dynamic setup is to look at the dynamic report. And the dynamic report you can actually look at which elements you want. So when you actually select dynamic report, you'll be given a specific set of when you pull a dynamic report, you'll be given a set of fields that you can actually edit and choose which ones to add in or remove from the report. And this can add or reduce the time it takes to generate those reports, so just be a bit mindful of adding in every single thing into this giant report, because you may be that you only need a certain couple of things from the actual report. The type of metrics that you can have, there's two kind of different types of metrics. Standard metrics are usually reported on automatically. This is a feature as a part of rich media creatives, and the enabler interaction will automatically log these things. There are things that you can do for custom metrics that you can add through GWD, so Google Web Designer, and these custom metrics can look at things like counters, reporting labels, strings, values that you want to pass back. You can do quite a lot with it. Most of the time, if you're using Google Web Designer anyway, we'll actually bundle in a lot of these custom metrics anyway. So the things that you commonly will need to use, we'll give you them as a sort of benefit of using some of the components in the physical tool for you guys who are designers or developers. Or even, the media agencies who maybe aren't as technical can still look into the tool as an easy way to start designing or even prototyping creative. So this is the view I was telling you about. Once you've actually got the fields and we've selected the dynamic report, it'll give you a selection of field types. Often, the most important will be the dynamic element value, because this is the parity or the parity with the actual that reporting label that you set up in your feed. So those two things are really important to note, because that is exactly what is going to be pulled from the feed. And so when you actually go through the physical report, you'll see how the creative variations did. You'll see the dynamic element value was the reporting label that we set up that concatenated or joined a lot of the data signals that we used in the feed. And then you also see the kind of performance metrics against each of them. But imagine if those element values were labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, it'd make it really difficult to gain anything out of this report without having to look back at the original feed. So this is a good example of how we can actually label up our report to make it really easy to gain insights from your campaign. And this can also be stacked up to add multiple fields that you can use in your reporting too. So just to clarify here, when we're running reports in DCM, you can do this. You can select the specific fields that you'd like to add or remove. There are custom templates as well. So reporting available for whatever your need is. More often than not, it'll be a dynamic report, but you can also access a lot of other reports as well that are very useful in your either troubleshooting or performance analytics. And then also understanding that the data is seamlessly pushed across our platforms that can be accessed in other parts of our stack as well. So it's important to know that we're collecting all of this data in one place, but you're able to access the majority of this through your report builder, both standard and the custom rich media metrics that we talked about, so both sides of the equation. And just to note on the whole experience, as we come to the sort of end of our journey, our closing steps here, we have a Think with Google article. Please do feel free to read when we talk through some of the aspects of the physical game itself. You can go and actually play the game yourself, understand maybe, now you understand how it was built, how it went through the steps of process of being built. You can play around with it yourself, customize the signals, so you can get to grips with understanding the full end-to-end stack picture, but also look at how you can kind of be quite creative as well, and you can take into account those signals and personalize every aspect of a creative. Everything is up for grabs here. And on top of that, we've made the game responsive as well, so it's cross-device compatible. So we're not leaving our mobile users in the lurch either. So please do take a read. We'll send this around shortly after. And just to come back, we've got a few questions. I know we've got a couple minutes left, but we do have received a couple of questions from Hannah. So we're in the process of implementing dynamic creatives using DoubleClick Studio. One of the things that we're struggling with is the best feed structure. We've multiple products and countries, and the feed can look huge. So we understand this, Hannah. Often you'll have a lot of data, and sometimes the simplest approach that makes sense is to structure all of it in a linear way that has all the data in one specific feed. There are efficiencies that you can use. So depending on the kind of signals and things you're using, there are more advanced features that help you make feeds a little bit more efficient than just listing every single variation in country in a specific feed. I think this is something that we can go into maybe in more detail. If you'd like to reach out to us, maybe we could send some information around this. But often, although it is a huge feed, we can actually ingest quite large data sets. So don't fear for now if it's something that you're not familiar with some of the more advanced features. We can still make the campaign work and get it up and running. And this is something we often suggest is getting your campaign up and running as a priority with the approach that feels natural to you and how you would structure your data. And then often once it's up and running, you can actually switch over to a more efficient setup to proceed with your campaign. I don't know if you have any other.
Yeah, I would also mention that you can break down your feed in several sub-feeds. So that's a lot more advanced, but that's something you can look into. And it links to your second question, is it possible to have a multi-tab feed where the targeting keys are retrieved from other tabs within the same sheet? So you can do that. It's called dependent selection. It's a bit of a technical word, but it basically means that you would have a parent feed. So you would have a main feed that does all the decisioning. So this will be where your targeting options will be. And then depending on what scenario is selected, you can refer from this parent feed back to your children feed. So you could imagine having feeds for different countries, and it will select the right feed depending on what came from the parent feed. And it's slightly complicated, so we can't really cover it in a short answer. But there are possibilities to break it down, yes, in multiple subfeeds. Was there any other questions in the live chat?
So I think there's perhaps no more questions for now. And actually, it's right on time. I think we're at our hour marker. If you guys do have additional questions, please add them in, and we can maybe follow up as well individually if you've got specific other questions that maybe you wanted to ask but didn't get a chance to. And yeah, I mean, thanks for listening. It's an interesting demo that looks at the whole stack. And often, if you don't break it up into slots and chunks, it's hard to conceptualize how you can come up with something that is so end to end and still have an understanding of all the pieces in the process. But the trick is really collaborating with your counterparts and making sure that everyone is kind of involved. But you also sit down and define a lot of these things right at the start of a campaign. And doing this together, this is genuinely the biggest advice that we give our clients, is that sitting down to decide all of these specific steps and what goes in each step and who is responsible is often the biggest catalyst for success, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you would have seen that through the demo, that it really does involve all the different stakeholders to collaborate on this, and quite often that's something that gets missed out. Things that get a bit siloed, and that's where it kind of tends to fail for these big implementations. So please do communicate with all the stakeholders, and everything should run smoothly.
Brilliant.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.